there was a session that pendulum session Dan and I held with Lindsay, and what Lindsay was wanting to do was talk to the spirit of her previous incarnation. Okay, she had previously been incarnated in generally the same area with the same family members, and in that previous incarnation, she was also still having visitations with the extraterrestrials, and that's where we kind of learned this has been an ongoing thing for some time. But she wanted to, if you will, talk to herself in the past life. So we had a situation where you've got physical Lindsay here and now carrying on conversation with me and Dan, and by means of the pendulum, Lindsay's having a conversation with herself as the spirit of her previous incarnation. And that just told a lot, that life is much, much more rich than ever I had previously considered. It's just a richness and a vastness and just a whole lot more fun.
See, that starts kind of getting into like a really deep concept, kind of explaining that almost like there's like a soul to a specific body or reincarnation of somebody, but then there's also this other consciousness that exists beyond that that's able to transverse, but there's still the like leftover of them as that person. Or maybe it's one of those things that all time is existing at the same time, and maybe there's multifacets to your consciousness that are all existing in multiple places at the same time, and then they're able to communicate with each other. But what's kind of your view on that? How do you think that whole kind of scheme works as far as being able to contact different variations of yourself, but still having the same consciousness? Do you think it's like a split, or do you think, like, how do you guys kind of view it?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good example.
Yeah.
It became evident that our consciousness, ourselves, our soul, if you want to use that term, is infinitely more vast than certainly this kid had previously imagined. That kind of had a basic belief that one soul, one body, one life. But it turns out that no, the soul is so vast that you can have multiple incarnations simultaneously or spread over time. And that concept really just opened everything up, that, whoa, hello, who we are is a whole lot greater than what we imagine.
Yeah, something.
See, that kind of makes me wonder if
George touched on about the group reincarnation. Lindsay's current dad and her sister were also her current dad and her sister in the previous incarnation.
See, that kind of that kind of lends credence to the fact of almost like, I don't want to say necessarily like a hive mind type of concept, but it's just consciousness split and spread between multiple places all at once. So like, I've kind of wondered, when we talk about reincarnation, if time isn't necessarily linear, if two physical versions of the same person could exist at the same time and they're just playing out two different lives. So obviously they wouldn't be like two of the same person within the same reality, but you know, there'd be like one incarnation, another incarnation that might cross over and exist at the same time. And if the soul is greater than how I've kind of viewed it, because I've kind of always seen it as with the whole reincarnation concept, that only one could exist in reality at a time. But if it's more vast than that, it kind of answers some other questions I've had, as far as like if two versions of yourself could exist at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah, you consider the fact that science is now proved there are other dimensions. And again, this is just my belief, but uncounted other dimensions. So maybe at times there's even a crossover.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's what I was kind of thinking. There might be some like tail ending off, because like you'll hear about some like some of the reincarnation stories where people will explain like how somebody died, or they'll have like the birthmark, because that's one thing that I've seen that seems pretty common, is that
Yeah.
when it comes to like reincarnation, you have the weird birthmark, which usually is how you died in a past life. And there's some of these times when this person will have been born before the person that they're claiming to have been dies, even if it's like within like a year of them being born. There's like that slight little bit of crossover. And that's always been kind of a gray area where I didn't quite know how to explain that. But, you know, with this whole new idea and concept to it, like that completely makes sense. And I mean, some people even kind of throw the idea too that it's almost like their first couple of years of life before you actually become, quote, like conscious and realize like you're a living person at that time. Maybe there's like an adapting period where it's more like a vessel that's just running off of pure instinct. And then once the brain or antenna, whatever, however you kind of want to refer to it or think of it as, develops, then that's when like the consciousness shift happens. So then maybe it makes a little bit more sense that it might happen within the first like year or two of that person being alive, that the other person that they claim to be later on in life passes away, is because they were living the end of that life. And then once the new vessel was, quote, like ready and wasn't just running off of just prime instinct, then it transfers into that. And that could be that moment that they say when you're around like 3 that you kind of just realize that you're a person and that you exist.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah.
Interesting thing, and just a sidebar here, but about birthmark, I've got a perfectly round birthmark on my right knee. And in my right knee, I've got, I've got a benign tumor, a bone spur, and on that side of my knee, I've got no cartilage whatsoever. And I was wearing my shorts one day. I was sitting with a psychic, and she looked at it and said, "That's where you got shot."
Just to tie in with what you just said, actually,
Yeah.
too, I have a birthmark that's right over my heart before I ended up getting it covered up with a tattoo at one point. But I did a past life regression, and in that, I was a Viking at a different point in time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there's obviously a lot more levels to this, but I had, I guess, ended up killing myself because I couldn't find my daughter, because the whole principle of that life was that my daughter died at a young age, and I was trying to go through all of these like magical concepts in order to be able to find her again. But that, I guess, I didn't end up dying the way that I assumed that I would have because of that birthmark. But now I kind of take that as that wasn't necessarily my last life linearly, but it may have been the one that I was the most attached to. And it seems like when people do these past life regressions, what comes up first isn't necessarily like the order in which that you've lived these lives, but rather the one that you were the most tied to. And when it kind of comes back to that back and forth with that, I've kind of noticed something as far as like past lives, that it seems like whatever life you are the most tied to is the one that you're trying to like counteract and be different of in this life. And maybe that's the reason why, is that when you're doing this back and forth, I guess kind of like a karma concept, that you're all the bad that you did in this one, you're trying to correct in this life. They may not be back to back like how people assume that they are. You know, you could be doing this through different times where, you know, I'm attached, say, to this Viking one that was way farther beyond what my last one was, linearly speaking. But, you know, in the next life, maybe that'll end up being the one that was my last life, because that'll be the one that has to counterbalance itself. And it's not necessarily like this back and forth, but rather this like jumping around, trying to balance each end of each other. And one might be farther back, and this one may be really far in the future. They're not necessarily back to back like a lot of people may perceive that they are.
Yeah, it's absolutely. I am a registered clinical hypnotherapist, and I've done I don't know how many dozens of past life regressions. But you know, again, this is my theory. But the past life that you're remembering, like you're Viking, is probably the most important to you now because of the lesson you need to learn from that experience. That's why it's surfacing now. There's a lesson to be learned from that.